Shabbat Shalom once again. For the past few months, once Friday rolls around, I have felt really ready for Shabbat. A little more drained than usual, a little hungrier for a moment to breathe and to get outside of myself. Nothing has changed necessarily from, say, 6 months ago in my work or in my day-to-day personal life, but that also might be part of the problem. At this point, thanks to the vaccine, I'm not quite as scared about my physical security as I was initially. But I also don't have the chance encounters or mishaps or journeys that punctuated my life before the pandemic and inspired me to be creative. So you can imagine my relief this week when I read a New York Times article that aptly described my own experience of trying to be innovative in a year when every day feels like it's identical to the one before it. There's a name for the blah you're feeling, the title explains. It's called languishing. The article's author, Adam Grant, is an organizational psychologist at Wharton. And in the article, he uses the word languishing to refer to the joyless and aimless experience of so many people after more than a year in this pandemic. We're not collectively depressed, but we're also not thriving. And on an emotional continuum between depression and flourishing, so many of us are caught in the middle right now in a state of languishing. It's not that everything is terrible, rather that most things are just fine. But being just fine may lead us to feel listless, or like our day-to-day lives aren't especially meaningful. Drawing from the work of sociologist Corey Keyes, who found that many people who weren't depressed were also not thriving, the article argues that this is where so many people find themselves today. We develop techniques to cope with the dread of the pandemic, so things don't feel as scary as they did a year ago, but the disruption to normal life remains. The Torah portion begins this week by addressing another disruption, a shock that sent Aaron into intense mourning and made him feel fear for his own life. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe Acharei-Mot shnei bnei Aharon. God spoke to Moses after the death of Aaron's two sons. You may recall 2 weeks ago that God struck down his sons Nadav and Avihu for burning a foreign offering that God had not commanded. And here, God tells Moses to warn Aaron not to come at will to the shrine behind the curtain, lest he suffer the same fate. God offers Aaron a technique that will protect him as he continues on as high priest, but he's still grappling with fear. A curtain had been pulled back, forcing Aaron to confront a life that he struggles to get used to. And in this way, too, Aaron is languishing. Even if techniques prevent the worst from happening, he's having an experience that does not feel normal. When the pandemic began, Adam Grant explains, our brain's threat detection system, called the amygdala, was on high alert for fight or flight. But as we've gotten used to the threat, the acute state of anguish has given way to a chronic condition of languish. In other words, we may know much more about coronavirus than we did initially, but so many curtains have been pulled back for us. We can't unsee the trauma that has unfolded, the lives lost, and the various fissures in our society that have become so visible. And things are still not normal. Even if by and large, many of us are doing okay, just being okay can take a toll. We're not as productive, we're not as happy, and with truly recognizable life still far off, it can be hard not to slip into a feeling that everything is futile. The rabbis of the Midrash Vayikra Rabbah seem to relate to the nihilism that can emerge in a state of languishing post-trauma. Commenting on this week's Parsha, they understand Nadav and Avihu to have been punished for having too much zeal for God in their foreign sacrifice. But they point out, it doesn't really matter that they might be righteous. They end up indistinguishable from other men, like Korach, who were killed for making sacrifices out of bitterness and not out of faith to God. Quoting Ecclesiastes, they explain, the same fate is in store for all, for the righteous and for the wicked. They go on to offer a laundry list of seemingly opposite figures in Jewish tradition who nonetheless suffered the same fate. 10 of the 12 men sent to scout the land of Israel were wicked, so they were forbidden from entering the promised land. But Moses, who was righteous, didn't get to enter the promised land either. King David set the foundation for the temple in Jerusalem and reigned for 40 years, but Nebuchadnezzar destroyed that temple and also reigned for 40 years. The rabbis add further examples from ancient Jewish history to make their point that whether you're righteous or you're wicked has little bearing on how your life will actually turn out. We may have expected the rabbis to say that if we do good, then good things will happen to us. But these ancient sages seem to say that there's not a whole lot you can actually change about your life. It's an early version of the proverb, man plans and God laughs. And their attitude is reflective of the languishing state in which so many of us find ourselves. Aware that there's little we can do to change our circumstances, we may not have energy to try and seek real meaning in our day-to-day lives. But even if the Midrash seems nihilistic about our ability to act, our ancient sages do understand one approach to life that we can take whenever we feel listless and hamstrung by circumstance. They don't go the route of the hedonists who say that we should seek pleasure above all while we're here on earth. Nor do they go so far as the later existentialists who say that everything is absurd and we should just do the best we can. Instead, they build on the rubric of the Torah to create a life of boundaries within which we can live. We may not be able to change our circumstances, they say, but we can live within certain parameters that help us find holiness while we are alive, even in our most mundane actions, eating, drinking, and putting on our clothes. Various restrictions on our behavior is the subject of the latter part of this parsha and the following two parshiot. And all of the restrictions therein are designed to bring holiness into a world that doesn't always feel so holy. This section of Leviticus is known as the Holiness Code because of how frequently the word kadosh, or holy, appears in relation to the various boundaries that the text delineates. Now, I have no idea whether or not Adam Grant had Leviticus in mind as he wrote his article for the New York Times this week. But he also mentions erecting boundaries as one way to address our languishing. By limiting ourselves to focus on one thing at a time, he explains, we may find that we are better able to lose ourselves in a creative project. By carving out space to do one thing that exhilarates us, we may find more satisfaction in our other activities. Perhaps these are things we can try. Yet most important of all, what's useful about his wisdom is simply to name our collective working below 100% as something, as languishing. By naming the experience, we might be better able to address it and move from a place of surviving to a place of thriving. Shabbat Shalom.